On a silent Christmas night when even the mountains of Silver Falls seemed to hold their breath, a lonely patrol car moved slowly through falling snow. Inside it, a sheriff and his loyal dog followed a feeling they could not explain. They did not know that beneath the frozen darkness, a child was kneeling alone in the storm, waiting for a miracle she had never learned to believe in. What happened next would change 3 lives forever and uncover a secret buried for nearly a decade. Before this story begins, tell me where you are watching from in the comments. Your voice matters here. And if you believe in stories of hope, courage, and second chances, please press subscribe to support the channel so we can continue sharing these winter miracles with you. Silver Falls was the kind of mountain town that looked peaceful enough to make people believe suffering could not reach it. Nestled between ancient pine forests and ice-slicked cliffs, the town glowed faintly under Christmas Eve snowfall, street lamps flickering like fragile stars trapped in glass. Snow poured down in thick, steady sheets, muffling sound, swallowing color, and turning every road into a pale ribbon of danger. The air was sharp enough to sting the lungs, the kind of cold that crept through coats and into the bones. Most homes were warm with light, decorated with wreaths and soft yellow windows glowing against the dark. But at the far edge of Pine Ridge Road, one cabin remained black and silent. Sheriff Logan Reed drove past it slowly, as he had for weeks. Logan was 39 years old, tall and broad-shouldered, built by years of hard labor and harder winters. His face carried the rough lines of a man who had learned restraint through loss, his storm-gray eyes calm but always alert. Dark hair streaked lightly with silver lay beneath his winter cap, and his steady hands on the wheel showed the discipline of a lawman who never rushed what mattered. Those who knew him in Silver Falls described Logan as quiet, dependable, slow to anger, and relentless once a line had been crossed. Years earlier, the death of a close military friend had changed him, carving a deeper silence into his nature and a sharper edge into his sense of duty. Beside him in the patrol truck sat Ash, his K9 partner, a 4-year-old male German shepherd with a powerful, athletic build and a sleek black and iron coat dusted with snow along his spine. Ash's amber eyes reflected every passing light, intelligent and unwavering, his ears constantly shifting as if translating the world into threats and truths. Trained for search and protection, Ash was loyal beyond command, his temperament controlled but deeply intuitive, especially when it came to human fear. For weeks now, something about the dark cabin at the end of Pine Ridge Road had disturbed him. Every time they passed it, Ash's posture tightened, his ears flattened subtly, and a low vibration formed in his chest that Logan felt through the leash more than heard. No barking, no aggression, only instinct sharpened to a warning. Logan had run the address twice. The property was registered to Donna Hale and her stepdaughter. No criminal flags, no prior complaints. And yet, the dog never relaxed near that place. Tonight, as the storm worsened, the unease returned stronger than ever. Snow struck the windshield sideways as Logan slowed near the cabin. Ash rose suddenly from his seated position, muscles locking. Then a sound pierced the wind, faint but unmistakable. A thin, broken cry struggling to survive the storm. Logan's foot slammed the brake, and the cruiser slid to a stop. "Ash," he breathed, already opening the door. They moved together, sprinting through knee-deep snow toward the shadowed property. The cabin loomed small and weather-beaten beneath the weight of winter, one lonely porch light flickering as if unsure whether it still had a purpose. Beneath that unsteady glow, a child knelt in the snow. Emily was 8 years old, small for her age, her frame fragile beneath layers that were far too thin for such cold. Her knees pressed directly into the frozen ground, her arms wrapped tightly around her torso, as if she were trying to hold herself together. Her brown hair, tangled and damp with melting snow, clung to her cheeks, which were pale and hollowed by fear. Her lips trembled soundlessly now, her earlier cries already exhausted by the storm. Standing over her was Donna. Donna Hale was a woman in her mid-40s with sharp features and rigid posture, the kind of person whose anger seemed permanently etched into the angles of her face. She wore a thick winter coat, thrown on hastily over indoor clothes, one glove missing, her uncovered hand raised mid-motion, as if the storm itself had frozen her there. To neighbors, Donna was distant but civil, A woman who kept to herself, spoke politely at the grocery store, never lingered in conversation. No one had ever seen what she became when the door of that dark cabin closed. Logan stepped forward, boots crunching loudly in the snow. "Drop your hand," he said, his voice calm but carved with steel. Donna spun toward him, eyes flashing first with shock, then calculation as she saw the badge, the gun, and finally the dog. Ash moved without sound, his massive frame positioning itself squarely between the woman and the child, head low, posture controlled, not snarling, not advancing, but making the boundary unmistakably clear. The wind roared through the trees, snow swirling around them like ash from a dying fire. "You don't understand," Donna snapped, her voice too sharp, too strained. "She ran outside. I was just trying to bring her back." Logan did not raise his voice. "Get away from the child." For a moment, Donna hesitated, eyes darting between Logan and Ash, her expression flickering with something close to panic. Slowly, she stepped back. Logan crouched in front of Emily, removing his heavy coat and wrapping it around her shaking shoulders. Emily flinched at the first touch, her body tensing as if expecting pain even from kindness. Ash lowered his head and gently pressed his muzzle against her freezing hands. The contact was warm, steady, alive. Emily did not pull away. Her shaking slowed, imperceptibly at first, then enough to notice. Sirens cut through the storm minutes later as the ambulance climbed Pine Ridge Road. Paramedics rushed forward, their movements efficient and quiet, careful not to startle the child any further. Emily was lifted gently onto a stretcher and wrapped in thermal foil. Logan rode in the front seat, his jaw set, snow still clinging to his hair and shoulders. Ash remained in the back with Emily, his body curved protectively against the side of the stretcher, eyes never leaving her face. As the medic adjusted the blanket at Emily's chest, something slipped from beneath her shirt and tapped softly against the metal rail. A worn military dog tag swung into view. Logan saw the name as the ambulance lights flashed across the steel. Ethan Carter. The sight struck him like a physical blow. Ethan had been his closest friend during their military training years, a man of unwavering loyalty and stubborn hope who had died under circumstances that never quite made sense. Years ago, Ethan had once said, half joking and half deadly serious, that if anything ever happened to his child, Logan would be the only man he would trust. Logan's hands tightened slowly into fists as the ambulance doors closed. Snow continued to fall over Silver Falls, quiet and indifferent, as the storm carried the first whisper of a truth buried beneath years of silence. Behind them, at the edge of town, the dark cabin stood empty again, its porch light flickering weakly against the wind, no longer able to hide what had been found beneath its roof. The storm had followed them to the hospital, dragging snow and wind through the sliding glass doors as the ambulance arrived. Silver Falls Medical Center stood like a quiet refuge against the mountain night, its warm lights trembling under the weight of winter. Nurses moved with practiced calm as Emily was rushed inside on the gurney, her small body wrapped in silver foil that crackled softly with each motion. Logan walked just behind the stretcher, boots leaving wet prints across the polished floor, his heartbeat steady but heavy. Ash padded silently at his side, his posture alert, his eyes never leaving the child. Emily's condition was worse than Logan had expected. Hypothermia had already begun to stiffen her muscles, and her breathing was shallow and uneven. The emergency physician, Dr. Margaret Hensley, a woman in her early 50s with gentle eyes behind square glasses and a voice shaped by decades of crisis rooms, issued quiet orders as the team worked. Margaret was known in Silver Falls not only for her skill, but for her rare ability to remain soft in a profession that often hardened its people. She carefully peeled back Emily's frozen clothing, noting bruises in various stages of healing along her thin arms and ribs. Her expression did not change, but something tightened behind her eyes. This was not a single night's accident. This was a long story written in pain. Logan stood back against the wall, hands folded tightly in front of him, watching the medical team fight the cold out of Emily's body. Ash lay down at the edge of the room without being commanded, his head resting between his paws, eyes open and vigilant. Every so often, Emily's trembling would spike suddenly, as if some unseen fear had found her again even in sleep. Each time it happened, Ash's ears would lift, and he would emit the faintest sound from his throat, a low vibration that seemed to steady her breathing. Even sedated, her small fingers twitched weakly in his direction. As the nurses adjusted the thermal blankets, the chain at Emily's neck slid fully into view. The worn military dog tag that Logan had glimpsed in the ambulance now lay against her chest beneath the bright hospital lights. Dr. Hensley reached for it gently to move it aside for the ultrasound wand. Logan's breath caught when the name became fully visible. Ethan Carter. The room seemed to tilt slightly as memory surged up without warning. Ethan's laugh in the barracks. Ethan's stubborn defiance during drills. Ethan standing in the snow years ago, breath fogging the air, pressing that same tag into Logan's palm for a moment with a quiet, desperate smile. "If anything ever happens to my girl," Ethan had said, voice low but unshaken, "you're the one I trust, brother." At the time, Logan had scoffed and shoved the tag back with a crooked grin, mocking fate as only young men do. Now, fate had answered in cold steel and a trembling child. Logan stepped closer. "Doctor," he said quietly, "may I look at that?" Dr. Hensley studied his face for a second, reading the unspoken gravity there, then nodded. Logan lifted the tag carefully, as though it might cut him. The name was real, the serial number beneath it, too familiar. His chest tightened slowly as something long buried inside him began to surface. Ethan Carter, officially dead in a training accident nearly 9 years earlier. A death that never sat right. A body returned with sealed reports and unanswered questions. A widow gone within a year. And now, a daughter, kneeling alone in the snow. Logan left the room and stood in the quiet hallway, pulling his phone from his coat. He contacted dispatch and requested immediate access to military casualty records tied to Ethan Carter, as well as any guardianship documentation filed since the death. Hours passed in a haze of fluorescent light and drifting snow beyond the windows. Through the glass of the treatment room, Logan watched Emily sleep, her chest rising more evenly now, as warmed blood returned to her limbs. Ash had not moved. Nurses learned quickly to step around him. The files came through just before dawn. Emily Carter, age 8. Biological father, Ethan Carter, deceased. Mother, deceased in a vehicular accident 3 years after Ethan's death. Current legal guardian. Stepmother, Donna Hale. Logan's jaw tightened as he read further. Donna had married Emily's mother less than a year before the accident. No extended family had stepped forward. Guardianship had transferred automatically. The paper trail was clean. Too clean. Logan leaned his head back against the wall and closed his eyes. The promise he had once dismissed as youthful bravado now burned through his chest like an open wound. Dr. Hensley approached him quietly. "She's stable," she said. "But the malnutrition is severe. So is the emotional trauma. This didn't begin last night." Logan nodded. "She's my friend's child," he said. Dr. Hensley's gaze softened. "Then she's not alone anymore." Morning light crept slowly over Silver Falls, pale and fragile through the snow clouds. Social services arrived before the town fully woke. 2 caseworkers entered the ward, with clipboards held close to their chests. Among them was Karen Blake, a woman in her early 40s with kind eyes and a voice that carried steady authority. She had worked child protection cases in mountain towns long enough to know that quiet places often hid the loudest suffering. Logan briefed them in low tones, every word heavy. Karen listened without interruption, her expression solemn as Emily's records were transferred into her hands. When Emily finally stirred, it was Ash she saw first. Her eyes fluttered open slowly, unfocused, searching. When the warmth of his fur came into view, something in her expression softened, a tiny flicker of recognition cutting through confusion. She moved her hand weakly. Ash lifted his head and leaned closer. Her fingers brushed the fur at his neck. The movement was small, uncertain, but it was real. Karen watched from the doorway, one hand pressed lightly to her mouth, as if not to disturb the miracle happening in front of her. Logan stepped into Emily's view. He did not speak her name. He did not yet know if she trusted names. He simply knelt so that he was not towering over her and said gently, "You're safe." Emily blinked slowly. Tears slid silently down the sides of her face, but her breathing remained steady. She did not nod. She did not speak. She only kept her hand resting against Ash's fur, as if letting go might send her back into the snow. Later that afternoon, Logan sat alone in his office, snow still falling beyond the blinds. Ethan's case file lay open on his desk beside the new CPS report on Emily. Two stories intersected now, across nearly a decade of silence. Logan turned the dog tag over in his fingers again and again. The metal was warm now, warmed by his skin, no longer cold. For the first time in years, he allowed himself to acknowledge what he had refused to see back then. Ethan had died under circumstances that no one wanted examined, and now his child had nearly frozen to death in a town that prided itself on peace. Logan's storm-gray eyes hardened with quiet resolve. A promise made in youth had returned as a duty of blood and snow. That night, Logan remained at the hospital long after his shift ended. Ash stayed beside Emily, rising only when nurses needed to adjust equipment, then lying back down the moment he was allowed. Karen returned to finalize temporary protective measures. Donna Hale had been taken into custody for questioning. The cabin on Pine Ridge Road was now sealed with yellow tape fluttering faintly in the snow. The storm outside began to ease at last, but inside the ward, the aftermath of winter still lingered in every shadow. Logan sat by Emily's bed as the machines hummed softly. "Your father was brave," he said quietly, not knowing if she could hear him. "He loved you?" Emily did not respond, but her fingers tightened ever so slightly in Ash's fur. The dog did not move. He simply stayed. Outside, Silver Falls slept beneath fresh snowfall, unaware that beneath its quiet surface, an old truth had begun to stir again. A soldier's legacy had returned through the fragile heartbeat of a child, and a promise, long buried beneath years of denial, had awakened in the cold. By the time the courthouse lights came on that morning, the snow had stopped falling over Silver Falls, leaving behind a silence so deep it felt unreal. The mountains stood frozen in pale witness, their ridgelines sharp against a sky slowly turning from gray to steel blue. The town woke as it always did after a storm, cautious and quiet, boots crunching on fresh drifts, windows fogging with heat and breath. But beneath the calm, something had shifted. A story had begun to move through the valley like an underground current, unseen yet impossible to ignore. Emily did not return to the cabin on Pine Ridge Road. She remained in a protected wing of the hospital while Child Protective Services initiated an emergency investigation. Karen Blake returned early with a younger caseworker named Michael Torres, a man in his late 20s with a lean frame, dark hair kept neatly trimmed, and the earnest intensity of someone who still believed deeply in the system he served. Michael had grown up in a crowded city where suffering hid behind brick and sirens. Silver Falls was his first rural assignment, and already it had taught him that isolation could be just as dangerous as noise. Together, Karen and Michael compiled the preliminary report with careful precision, knowing that what they documented in these first hours would shape Emily's future. Dr. Hensley's medical findings were entered into the record. The bruises along Emily's arms and ribs were not consistent with a single incident. Some were fresh, others already fading into yellow and green shadows beneath her skin. There were abrasions along her knees that matched prolonged exposure to cold ground. Her weight was far below what it should have been for an 8-year-old child. Hypothermia had nearly claimed her life, but it was malnutrition that spoke of a longer battle. The hospital had treated countless cases over the years, but this one carried a particular weight. This was not neglect born of poverty or ignorance. This was harm, with pattern and intent. Logan stood in the hallway as Karen summarized the findings. His face was still, unreadable to most, but beneath the calm, his thoughts raced. Every detail added another quiet accusation against a woman who, until days ago, had existed in town as nothing more than a shadow at the end of a road. Donna Hale remained in custody for questioning. She denied everything, claimed Emily was clumsy, claimed the child lied for attention, claimed the cold night had been an accident. Her statements were flat, rehearsed, and completely contradicted by the evidence building against her. The neighbors' reports soon followed. Over the past year, there had been at least 3 anonymous calls to the non-emergency line reporting raised voices from the cabin late at night. One neighbor, an older man named Harold with a stooped back and trembling hands, finally agreed to give a formal statement. He admitted that he had heard crying through the trees more than once, but had convinced himself it was none of his business. His shame hung heavy in the interview room. Emily remained mostly silent through the morning. Even as her temperature stabilized and color slowly returned to her cheeks, she flinched whenever footsteps approached too quickly. The only constant that kept her anchored was Ash. He lay at the edge of her bed like a living sentry, lifting his head whenever someone entered, then lowering it again when Emily's breathing steadied. Nurses were no longer surprised when they found that procedures went more smoothly if the dog remained in place. It was Michael who gently suggested that Emily be allowed to give a preliminary statement in the presence of Ash. Karen hesitated only briefly. Trauma-informed protocol supported the idea. Logan remained just outside the room, giving the child space while staying close enough to intervene if she shut down. Karen knelt beside the bed, her voice soft and unhurried. "Emily," she said, "no one here is going to hurt you. You don't have to tell us everything. Only what you feel safe sharing." Emily stared at the blanket, small fingers clenched in Ash's fur. The dog did not move. Minutes passed. The room seemed to hold its breath. Then, in a voice barely louder than the machines beside her, Emily spoke. "She gets angry," she whispered. Karen nodded gently. "When does she get angry?" Emily swallowed. "When I drop things, when I eat slow, when I cry." Karen's throat tightened, but she kept her voice steady. "What happens when she gets angry?" Emily's shoulders trembled. Ash lifted his head slightly. Emily's fingers tightened in his fur. "She makes me kneel," she said. "Sometimes outside." The words fell into the room with devastating weight. Karen closed her eyes for a single moment before reopening them. The statement alone was enough to trigger emergency removal. The evidence was no longer circumstantial. It was personal. It was living. By early afternoon, the emergency custody hearing was scheduled. Not a full trial, not a final judgment, but a necessary legal barrier between the child and the person accused of harming her. Logan sat in the small courtroom with Ash at his feet, the wooden benches creaking beneath the shifting weight of quiet spectators. Karen sat at the front with the CPS attorney. Donna entered from the opposite side under escort. She looked smaller now, stripped of the isolation that had once protected her. Her eyes flicked once toward Logan, sharp with something between hatred and fear. The judge, a woman in her 60s with silver hair pulled into a tight knot, reviewed the evidence without theatrics. Medical findings, neighbor reports, preliminary testimony, the pattern was clear. "This court finds sufficient cause to issue an emergency separation order," she said. "Temporary custody is to be removed from Donna Hale effective immediately." Donna rose to protest, her voice sharp and unraveling, but the gavel fell once, firm and final. "The child will be placed under temporary protective guardianship, pending full investigation." There was a brief pause as Karen exchanged quiet words with the attorney. Then Karen stood. "Your Honor," she said, "due to the child's extreme trauma response and her demonstrated reliance on Sheriff Logan Reed and his K-9 partner for emotional regulation, we formally request that temporary emergency guardianship be granted to Sheriff Reed." A ripple moved through the courtroom. Logan stiffened. He had expected foster placement, maybe a state facility. This was different. The judge studied him carefully. "Sheriff," she said, "are you prepared to accept this responsibility on a temporary basis, under full CPS supervision?" Logan's answer came without hesitation. "Yes, Your Honor." The gavel sounded again. "Temporary emergency guardianship is granted. All conditions of supervision will apply." The sun was already setting when Logan carried Emily across the threshold of his home. Snow lay quietly along the porch railing and steps, untouched since the storm. His house sat just beyond the town center, modest and sturdy, the kind of place built more for survival than show. Inside, warm lamplight spilled gently across hardwood floors and simple furniture worn smooth by years of steady use. Emily clutched Ash's fur with one hand and Logan's jacket with the other as he set her down inside. She did not speak. She only looked around with wide, cautious eyes, as if waiting for something terrible to emerge from the corners. Logan showed her the guest room that would be hers for now. Clean blankets waited on the bed. A small lamp cast a gentle pool of light. Ash stepped inside first, circled once, then lay down near the foot of the bed. Emily climbed onto the mattress slowly, testing the surface as if uncertain it would hold her. Logan lingered at the door. "You're safe here," he said simply. He left the door open. That night, Emily did not wake to the sound of a key turning in a lock. There was no bolt sliding into place from the outside. When her eyes fluttered open from a restless half-sleep, the room remained warm and still. Ash lay breathing softly near her feet. Down the hall, she could hear Logan moving quietly through the house, the ordinary sounds of someone existing nearby without threat. It was the first night of her life without a door being locked against her from the outside. Outside, Silver Falls lay hushed beneath moonlit snow. And for the first time since winter had begun, the cold did not reach inside the walls of one small house at the edge of town. Winter did not loosen its hold on Silver Falls after Emily crossed Logan's threshold. The days grew brighter, but no warmer, sunlight reflecting off fields of snow like pale glass. At night, frost climbed the windows of Logan's house in delicate veins, and the mountains watched silently as if guarding secrets older than the town itself. Inside, Emily's presence altered the rhythm of the house in ways both fragile and profound. She spoke little, moved softly, and startled easily. But each morning, she woke with Ash already at the foot of her bed, steady as a promise the world had not broken yet. Logan did not tell her what had begun to unravel behind the scenes. Some truths were too heavy to place on a child's shoulders, but he felt it in his bones now, the way a storm announces itself long before the thunder arrives. Ethan Carter's death had never truly ended. It had only waited. The first sign came through the financial records. A quiet audit ordered through state channels revealed several life insurance disbursements tied to Ethan's death that had never appeared in the official county summary. Multiple policies, different carriers, staggered payout dates, all legally claimed, all unusually large for a man who, on paper, had earned very little. Logan stared at the numbers late into the night in his office, ash-gray light from the desk lamp cutting sharp shadows across the walls. There were signatures where there should not have been signatures, authorizations recorded without proper witnesses, forms that bore Ethan's name but lacked the chain of custody seals required for military fatalities. It was not overt sloppiness. It was careful enough to pass unless someone went looking. Logan went looking. The medical examiner who had signed off on Ethan's death 9 years earlier was retired now and living on the edge of town. Dr. Samuel Rourke had once been a meticulous man, respected for precision and unshakable ethics. Age had thinned his hair and bent his spine, but his mind remained sharp. Logan sat with him at a small kitchen table dusted with flour from unfinished bread dough. When Logan placed copies of the old autopsy reports before him, Rourke's hands trembled. "I remember this case," the old doctor said after a long silence. "Too clean, too sealed. I questioned it then." Logan asked why nothing had been done. Rourke's gaze drifted to the frost-clouded window. "Because sometimes questions come with pressure, and pressure carries consequences." The implication hung heavy in the air. Rourke admitted that certain files had been removed from his access soon after the report was finalized. Federal jurisdiction, he had been told. That explanation had ended the conversation 9 years ago. It would not end it now. By week's end, the evidence crossed the threshold that Logan could no longer contain within county authority. He contacted a federal liaison he trusted, a woman named Agent Rachel Morgan from the regional FBI office. Rachel was in her mid-30s, compact and sharp-eyed, with the quiet intensity of someone who observed far more than she revealed. She had built a reputation for dismantling financial crime networks that thrived behind respectable facades. When Logan laid the files across the steel table in the secured interview room, she scanned them once and felt the pattern immediately. "This isn't just insurance fraud," she said. "This looks organized." Within 48 hours, the federal seal replaced the county stamp on Ethan Carter's case. The file was officially reopened. Donna Hale's name appeared again and again as a beneficiary, facilitator, and witness across several policy lines, tied not only to Ethan, but to at least 3 other deceased service members over a 5-year span. Different names, different states, same method. each death ruled accidental during training or non-combat operations, each insurance trail unusually profitable, each file closed swiftly, a quiet ring of women exploiting military systems through grief and paperwork. Donna was no mastermind, but she was no bystander either. She was a node in something larger, smaller than a cartel, quieter than a syndicate, and far more difficult to detect. Ash became essential once the investigation moved beyond paper. Several abandoned military storage facilities on the outskirts of the county were flagged as potential staging points where documentation and physical evidence might have passed hands. They were long decommissioned, left to rust beneath snowfall and vines. Logan guided Ash through the first location at dawn, breath fogging the air as metal doors creaked open. The interior smelled of oil, dust, and time. Ash moved with controlled confidence, nose sweeping methodically along the concrete floor, then lifting sharply near the far wall. He stopped at a cluster of crates buried beneath tarps. Logan pulled the coverings back to reveal empty ammunition boxes and shipping manifests left behind in haste. Dates matched the windows of the questionable policies, routes traced backward to transit corridors that fed into out-of-state financial transfer hubs. At a second site, higher up along a frozen ridge road, Ash tracked the faintest remnants of human scent through drifts that had erased nearly everything else. The trail wound past collapsed fencing and into a narrow ravine where tires had once spun through slush and mud. Embedded beneath ice, Logan found fragments of burnt paperwork fused together, edges blackened, the center bearing partial serial numbers linked to Ethan's decommissioned unit. The evidence no longer whispered, it spoke. The investigation accelerated with quiet urgency. Raids were executed in 3 counties. Accounts were frozen. One woman was arrested while attempting to liquidate assets tied to a newly listed policy that mirrored Ethan's structure almost exactly. Another disappeared before warrants could be served, leaving behind an empty apartment and a silence that proved how many gaps still remained. Donna remained in county custody, separated from the larger case only by geography, not significance. Her interviews with federal agents began to fracture her composure. She confessed to greed, to fear, to being pulled into a system that promised money in exchange for nothing but signatures and silence. She denied knowledge of murder. The evidence disagreed. Throughout it all, Emily did not ask questions. She healed slowly, physically first, then in quieter ways that could not be measured. She learned that mornings brought warm oatmeal and Ash's steady presence. She learned that evenings ended with Logan reading aloud in a low, even voice that never demanded a response. Nightmares still found her sometimes. When they did, she woke in a cold rush of breath and memory, only to find Ash already standing beside her bed, ears forward, eyes calm. Logan would arrive seconds later, kneeling at the doorframe, as if mindful not to invade her space. Gradually, the space itself softened. One evening, after a day of depositions and sealed briefings, Logan returned home later than usual. Emily was in the living room coloring quietly. Ash stretched nearby. She looked up as the door closed and studied Logan's face. "Are you sad today?" she asked softly. The question caught him off guard. He considered lying. Instead, he nodded. "A little." She returned to her drawing without comment, then, after a moment, pushed the paper toward him. It was simple, drawn in uneven lines. A man, a dog, and a small figure holding both their hands. Logan swallowed slowly. "Thank you," he said. Emily nodded once, as if the exchange required no further explanation. By late winter, the truth had fully breached the surface. Ethan Carter had not died by accident. His training incident had been staged after he uncovered irregularities in the very insurance programs later used to profit from his death. He had been silenced through process rather than violence, a method that left no bruises but erased a man just as effectively. Donna had known enough to benefit and remain silent. Others had known more and vanished. When Logan received the final summary from Agent Morgan, the words felt heavier than stone. Justice was no longer an abstract idea. It was a path that cut through years of shadow. The town did not know the full story yet. Perhaps it never would. But something had shifted. The quiet lie that had once protected the illusion of peace had been torn open by the trembling hands of a child in the snow. As the investigation moved toward its next stage, Logan stood on his porch one night, watching snow fall under starlight that no longer felt entirely cold. Ash lay at his feet. Inside, Emily slept without restraints or locks, and somewhere beyond the mountains, the echo of a soldier's unfinished truth finally found its voice. Spring tried to reach Silver Falls that year, but winter refused to loosen its grip easily. Snow melted in thin, reluctant rivers along the streets during the day, only to harden into ice again by morning. The mountains shifted from white to gray, not quite alive with color yet, as if the land itself hesitated to believe that warmth could truly return. In many ways, the town mirrored the investigation now unfolding behind sealed doors, slow, measured, resistant to hope. Justice, Logan learned, did not arrive with thunder. It came with paperwork. Weeks turned into months as depositions were recorded, financial webs untangled, and sealed testimonies carried quietly between agencies. The ring tied to the exploitation of fallen soldiers' insurance policies was far more extensive than first believed. Some of the women involved vanished early, slipping beyond borders or dissolving into false identities before warrants could reach them. Others were located but spoke nothing, their silence thick with legal counsel and calculated fear. Every arrest uncovered another missing thread. Every confession revealed another shadow not yet named. Donna Hale remained at the center of the local case, though it became increasingly clear she had never acted alone. In federal interviews, her composure deteriorated steadily. The sharp edge of her anger dulled into a brittle kind of despair. At times, she confessed to knowing more than she had admitted before. At other moments, she retreated entirely, wrapped in denial as though it were armor. She could not escape the evidence, however. Financial documents, falsified guardianship records, forged witness signatures, and the medical history of a child she had tried to erase all braided into a truth too heavy to be denied. Emily's life unfolded at a different pace. She attended school under supervision at first, her backpack light, her steps cautious. The classroom frightened her with its sudden noises and open space, but the presence of Ash waiting outside the building at the end of each day steadied her. Children whispered when they saw the sheriff's dog resting near the entrance, as still as a statue and twice as watchful. Some stared, some waved timidly. Emily learned to lift her hand and wave back. It was a small victory, but it carried the weight of many. At night, the world still invaded her sleep. The sound of raised voices in neighboring houses, the slam of a car door, the snap of winter branches. Sometimes she woke drenched in fear, breath locked in her chest, eyes searching the dark. Each time, Ash was already moving. Each time, Logan followed close behind, never rushing her, never demanding words. He would sit on the floor at the edge of her bed until the tremors eased, until the room felt real again. He never asked why the dreams came. He only stayed until they left. Karen Blake visited often, monitoring the conditions of the emergency guardianship. She observed quietly how Emily leaned into Logan's presence not with dependence, but with something closer to trust. The child had begun to ask questions now, not about the case, not about Donna, but about ordinary things. How tall the mountains were, why Ash's ears changed shapes, whether snow could ever run out. These were the questions of a girl rediscovering the permission to be 8 years old. The courtroom did not offer such gentleness. Donna's trial began in early summer, when the last traces of snow still clung stubbornly to the highest ridges. The town gathered in divided silence. Some came seeking answers. Others came only to confirm what they already feared. Donna entered the courtroom thinner than before, her sharp edges blunted by months of confinement. She no longer met Logan's gaze. The prosecution laid out its case piece by piece, not dramatized, not rushed. The pattern of abuse, the falsified medical excuses, the financial transfers, the deliberate concealment of evidence connected to Ethan Carter's death, the exploitation of a child to maintain silence. Emily did not attend. She spent those days with Karen at a neutral location, coloring quietly while adults spoke in careful whispers beyond thin walls. Ash accompanied her always. She understood only that something important was happening somewhere else, something heavy, something that everyone seemed to walk around rather than name. Witnesses took the stand, financial analysts, medical experts, neighbors who finally found their voices after years of looking away. Each testimony carved another fissure into Donna's defense. When Donna herself was called to speak, the courtroom stilled. She denied the cruelty. She reframed the bruises as accidents. She cast herself as overwhelmed, misunderstood, betrayed by a child who made up stories. But the words carried no weight. They fell into the room and disappeared beneath the evidence left behind by broken bones, freezing nights, and a soldier's erased legacy. When the verdict came, it did not feel like triumph. Donna Hale was found guilty on all counts: long-term child abuse, conspiracy to conceal violent wrongdoing, and insurance fraud tied to multiple deceased service members. The sentence was life imprisonment without the possibility of parole under state and federal consolidation statutes. The gavel struck once, not loud, not dramatic. Final. Donna did not cry. She simply stood as if trying to calculate the shape of eternity within the space of a breath. Then she was led away, the weight of her crimes following her into a quiet that would never end. The investigation itself did not conclude with her sentencing. Some names remained sealed. Some trails ended abruptly in empty apartments, abandoned phones, and closed borders. Justice reached only as far as it was permitted. Agent Morgan admitted as much in her final briefing to Logan. "We dismantled a network," she said, "but not every shadow stood still long enough to be caught." It was not a failure. It was the truth of how such crimes survived, through fragments, through silence, through the cracks in systems built by human hands. Healing, Logan learned, followed the same uncertain architecture. Emily did not suddenly become whole because the court had spoken. The nightmares still came, though less often now. Loud sounds still startled her. Certain smells, cold metal, stale fabric, still sent her into silent retreat. But between the fractures, something else grew. She began to sleep through entire nights. She learned to laugh quietly at small, unexpected moments. She argued gently with Logan about vegetables and bedtime. She brushed Ash's fur every evening with solemn dedication, as if committing love to muscle memory. One night in late summer, thunder rolled across the mountains, startling her awake. Logan was in her room before she could cry out. Ash stood between them, steady as always. Emily's breathing shook for a few moments. Then she whispered, "You didn't leave." Logan shook his head. "I won't," he said simply. It was not a promise spoken for effect. It was a fact accepted into the bones of the house. The town began to move forward in its own careful way. Pine Ridge Road reopened after months of police tape and unanswered questions. The cabin at the end of the street remained dark, its windows boarded, its porch light finally extinguished. Children rode bicycles past it without knowing its history. Adults lowered their voices instinctively when they passed. Some wounds healed only by being left behind. Logan continued his patrols. Ash returned to full duty beside him. Emily waited at home some nights with homework spread carefully across the kitchen table, the pencil held just a little too tightly. When Logan came through the door, she always looked up, eyes checking not for permission, but for presence. It was enough. Justice had come. Not swiftly, not completely, but it had come far enough to change the shape of their lives. And for now, that was enough to breathe. A year does not change the mountains of Silver Falls. They remain where they have always been, ancient and unmoved by the brief stories of human lives. But a year changes everything that learns to breathe beneath their shadow. When the first snow of the next winter drifted across the valley once more, it did not fall with the same cruelty as before. It came gently, almost shyly, as if the sky itself had learned something about mercy. The process had taken longer than anyone dared to hope. Psychological evaluations, home inspections, background checks, financial reviews, character assessments, supervised visitations. Every step measured. Every page signed with the weight of permanence. Logan submitted to it all without complaint. His home became a place of clipboards and quiet questions. Strangers stepping carefully through hallways that had once known only silence and patrol routines. Karen Blake guided the process with steady patience, explaining each phase in gentle terms to Emily, never promising what could not yet be given. Emily changed slowly during that year, as children do when the world stops breaking them for long enough to let them grow again. Her shoulders lost some of their constant tension. Her laughter came in small bursts at first, surprised by itself. She learned which rooms in the house were warmest in the morning, which steps on the staircase creaked loudest, which corner of the living room Ash preferred on winter afternoons, when the sunlight pooled gold against the floor. The scars inside her did not vanish. They softened. They folded themselves into memory rather than controlling the present. Logan learned how to be a father without ever naming it. He learned the rhythm of school mornings, of mismatched socks and half-finished breakfasts. He learned the weight of a child's disappointment when snow canceled a class party and the quiet triumph when it returned the following week. He learned that silence could be shared without fear now, that the sound of small footsteps moving freely through the house was not a vulnerability, but a victory. He never spoke of Ethan unless Emily asked, and when she did, he answered only what her age could carry. Ash never needed to learn. He simply stayed. The final court date arrived in early December, when Silver Falls had already been dusted twice with snow that melted by noon. Logan sat in the familiar wooden bench beside Karen. Emily waited in a nearby room with a volunteer counselor and a tin of colored pencils. Ash lay at Logan's feet as he always did, eyes calm, present, unafraid of what human law might decide. The judge reviewed the year of documentation in composed silence. Her silver hair gleamed beneath the courtroom lights as she turned each page with deliberate care. The court finds that all requirements for permanent adoption have been satisfied, she said at last. Logan's breath caught before he realized it had. The child, Emily Carter, is hereby legally adopted by Sheriff Logan Reed. The gavel struck once. This time, the sound felt like a rival. Logan did not speak for several seconds after the ruling. Karen touched his arm gently. When he stood, his movement was unsteady in a way no patrol duty had ever caused. He crossed the short distance to the waiting room. Emily looked up at him with cautious curiosity. He knelt in front of her. "It's done," he said quietly. She studied his face as if searching for danger hidden in the words. "What's done?" she asked. Logan swallowed. "You're my daughter now." For a moment, she did not move. Then her arms wrapped around his neck with sudden, fierce certainty. Ash rose and pressed close to both of them, his weight warm and grounding. Karen turned away discreetly, her own eyes wet with unprofessional relief. Christmas arrived softly that year. Silver Falls glowed beneath strings of lights hung cautiously between storefronts and street lamps. Snow returned the night before the holiday, thick and steady, layering the town in white once again. But this time, the cold did not creep inside the Reed house. The fire burned low and steady in the living room. The air smelled of pine and cinnamon. Emily's laughter slipped through the rooms like a sound that had always belonged there. On the mantel hung 2 stockings. One was old, faded with time, stitched years ago in quiet remembrance. Ethan's name was embroidered across it in the patient thread. Logan had kept it hidden for years, unable to decide whether memory was a comfort or a wound. The second stocking was new. Emily stood on a small stool as Logan lifted it into place beside the old one. She held the edge carefully, aligning it just right. When she stepped down, she stared at both of them for a long time. "Is it okay that they're together?" she asked softly. Logan nodded. "It's exactly where they belong." Later that evening, after dinner plates were cleared and the fire settled into its steady glow, Logan handed Emily a single folded document. The paper was official, crisp with legal finality. She opened it slowly, uncertain at first how to read what mattered most. Logan knelt beside her. "That's your new name," he said gently. Emily traced the printed letters with her finger. "Emily Carter Reed." She whispered it once, testing the sound. Then again, a little louder. Something inside her eyes shifted. Subtle. Profound. She folded the paper carefully, as if it were fragile glass, and held it to her chest. The firelight caught the faint smile that trembled across her face. Ash lay at her feet, head resting against her ankle. Outside, snow drifted quietly past the windows. The town slept beneath winter again, but this winter no longer felt endless. Emily carried her stocking to the hearth and hung it between the 2 names she now belonged to. She stood there for a long moment, then turned back toward Logan. "I have a home now," she said. The words were not sakes loud. They did not need to be. Logan felt them settle into the walls, into the floor, into the air itself. He nodded once, unable to speak past what had filled his chest. Ash's tail thumped softly against the rug. Later that night, after Emily had fallen asleep with the new paper still tucked beneath her pillow, Logan stood at the window and watched the snow fall. For the first time in 2 winters, it did not feel like a warning. It felt like a blessing, quiet enough to be trusted. Somewhere beyond the mountains, a soldier's promise had finally completed its circle, and beneath the falling snow of Silver Falls, a child no longer feared winter. In the quiet ending of this story, we are reminded that God's miracles do not always arrive with thunder or bright signs. Sometimes they come through a loyal dog that refuses to leave a frightened child. Sometimes they come through a promise kept after many long years. And sometimes they come through a broken heart that slowly learns how to trust again. In our daily lives, we all face moments of fear, loneliness, or regret when the cold feels too heavy and hope feels too far away. But God walks with us even in those moments, guiding our steps and sending help in ways we do not always recognize at first. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who may need hope today. Leave a comment to tell us where you are watching from, and type Amen if you believe in the quiet miracles God still sends into our lives. May God bless you and your loved ones with peace, protection, and strength in every season. And please remember to support the channel by pressing subscribe so we can continue bringing you stories of faith, love, and second chances.